Hello, everybody. I hope this works. I'm going to try to keep this brief. I tend to go over because I'm a prolix bugger. It can't be helped. I'd like to talk about exercises. And indeed, I'd like to argue in favor of taking the escalator wherever possible. My Chambers Dictionary defines exercise thus. You're more than welcome to peruse that. Obviously, the bits that interest us are the acquisition of skills. I'm regarding language here entirely as a skill. An exertion of the mind, which is rather nice, and tasks. In particular, we're thinking about tasks. We're thinking about designing tasks for the language classroom. So we do like an exercise, don't we? Because it makes life easier. You know, you wander into your classroom and you need to keep the class quiet for a few minutes, and you've just done your wonderful jumpy about, I've got fruit in a bag kind of presentation, and now you need them to spend 10 or 15 minutes with their heads down doing something interesting, or at least valuable, or at least something they will recognize as learning. And so we like an exercise, and we put it in there. Really, whatever various theoreticians and Delta courses have told us about communication. And we use them to do useful things. We use them to focus on form, which is, of course, terrifically important. We need, when we are doing our CELTA, when we're even doing our Delta, to focus on meaning, form, and pronunciation, which of course are three entirely different things, and therefore, can be separated out comfortably and need to be focused on separately. So we need to focus on form from time to time. We need a second P, because we are doing our CELTA course, and we know that we need 3 Ps. We need to present something which will probably involve some visuals of some kind, and then we need some controlled practice. And what could be more controlled practice than a gap fill? It's perfect, isn't it? Learners can learn to manipulate form. We need to focus on accuracy, because it's another of those, I was going to say another dichotomy. The meaning, form, pronunciation is a trichotomy, but the accuracy, fluency is certainly a tension within language. I don't think many people would have a problem with the idea that accuracy and fluency are in tension, that there are those learners who are terribly focused on producing accurately. There are those other learners who are terrifically fluent, but accuracy tends to fall down a little bit. I think it was it A.S. Hornby who said that learners need to achieve accuracy before striving for fluency. I couldn't find that quote, actually. I tried, but I got Harold Palmer instead. It's a similar, yeah, they were colleagues, weren't they? This idea that we need to develop accurate habits before, and it's worth noticing the date. This is 1922. This is situational language teaching. This is something that is historical, but yet it remains. Like so many artifacts of language teaching, it remains. And it remains because teachers find it useful, because teachers find it helpful. When I did my CTEFLA, drilling was considered a very bad thing. It's not. It's a good thing. It's a useful thing. Teachers do it. And teachers do stuff that works. And one of the things that teachers do is exercises. So for all that on your Delta course, in particular on your Delta course, you may have people banging on about communicative value and about exchanging meaning. You're still going to go into your classroom and you're going to do an exercise. And if you're not, your course book is going to ask you to do that, because that's what happens. And you get exercises, and this is an exercise from Murphy's Essential Grammar, hugely selling. It's not intended for classroom use, no. It's intended for self-study, but the number of times I've seen teachers wander into classrooms with a couple of pages of Murphy, you wouldn't believe. So we have an exercise, and we have an exercise which basically, when you think about it, is more or less asking learners, because obviously on the facing page, Murphy has set out some rules, and what the learner needs to do here is identify the verb in the first sentence, choose the appropriate form of the verb have, select the past participle, and bang it in there, with the exception of the last one, where they need to remember that it's been an ing form. They don't need to know what any of that means. What they need to do is perform a transformation. They need to do a mechanical act. We could make it a little bit more meaningful. We could, this is from Empower, which I think is a very good course book for what it's worth. The sculpture blank bracket create in 1870. Here we have a slight choice to make. We have to choose active or passive. But again, having been told the form, we choose a version of the verb be, and we add a third form of the verb, a past participle, if you like. Or we decide that we just need a simple past. So we're making a small choice. Here's a choice. Let me give you an exercise. I've invented some verbs for the purpose. I'm not going to ask for, interaction. Who cares for that? Julie and Kevin donk in Brighton. They have donked in Brighton. I breach regularly. I have it's irregular. I tricked you. The symphony was bangeranged in Germany. The film was fronted. This is gibberish, is it not? And yet I can complete it. The only problem I have is the verb breed regular or not, which is, on the back page of your elementary level course book. And then we get things like this. This is a future forms one. I think I get a new computer for Christmas. I think I'll get a new computer for Christmas. My dad and my brother usually buy me new computer games, so probably I want to get a new, or maybe I think I'm getting a new computer game for Christmas, because my wife's been acting all funny around when I complain about the computer and the speed of it. And so I think I'm getting a new. The problem is that an awful lot of language, the choice is not a choice of correct or incorrect. It's a choice of, am I sending the right message or not sending the right message? It's not just grammatical. It's not even just contextual. It's wider than that. It's about what I'm trying to say. And this is something that leads us into this kind of thing. This is taken from, I think, oops, pardon me. I think this is taken from Speak Out. We end up with activities, we end up with exercises where we have to choose the right form. But the problem is that an awful lot of what is encoded in the right form needs to be added to the sentence in order for the learner to choose the right form. So we're going to Venezuela on holiday this year, or we might go to Venezuela on holiday this year. How do you choose? You choose because I say, I booked yesterday. Therefore, you know from the grammar book box earlier on that this is something that is prearranged, and therefore you need, we're going. We'll probably go camping. We're going to go camping, but we're not sure yet. Tricky. We're going to go camping. That would be a plan, wouldn't it? So we're not going to choose that one, but we're probably going to go camping, but we're not sure yet. Would that be a problem? The problem there is not which form are you choosing. It's just the word probably. And that very often these exercises need to put information in there in a way which is either slightly unnatural, I booked yesterday, or is intended to steer you towards one part of the grammar box or the other. But it's not really asking you to think about what's going on. So we have the other alternative where we have a text where we actually do have discourse. We have a meaningful text. And we're asking learners to choose the appropriate verb. So they're actually having to engage to some extent with meaning. I guess that's somewhere, but it's not their meaning. They're not making that meaning. They're not creating that meaning. They are reproducing that meaning. They're recreating meaning. I don't know. Here's another, or rather the same one. We're going to Venezuela on holiday. I booked last year. My bus home go, okay, I kind of get there. What we can do to make it more meaningful is we can personalize it. So we can add an instruction at the bottom of our course book activity to change 5 of the sentences so they are true for you. Let me try. I'm not going to Venezuela on holiday this year. I didn't book yesterday. I'm not going anywhere on holiday. I haven't booked. No, I'm not going camping. It's horrible. On Saturday, no. Well, I don't need that because I'm an English speaker. Yeah, it'll rain this weekend. I reckon it will. I don't take the bus home. There's no lesson this week, seriously. So I don't have to come to work. This is how do you make these sentences true about you? This is nonsense. It's a nice idea, yes. But seriously, I challenge you to make these sentences true about you in any meaningful way without making huge changes to the meaning. The grammar is almost irrelevant. The meaning is the problem. The problem here is Venezuela booking yesterday. That's my problem. Going camping. That's my issue. It's about making stuff up. An awful lot of what exercises do or don't do is they don't require understanding of the sentence. And very often we're talking about sentences, and I don't even want to go into sentence as a unit of language meaning because it's just too painful. But in order successfully to complete the exercise, I need to make some kind of mechanical transformation of language, which has nothing to do with my understanding. It has nothing to do with any kind of meaning. They very often need to create strange, often tautologous sentences in order to signal choices, that where you have the kind of the future forms thing where, quite frankly, grammatically, 3 or 4 forms would fit. So you need to put something completely weird in there in order to make it make sense. The difference ultimately between I'm going to go to the pub and I'm going to the pub is whether I'm trying to turn you down for an invitation or not. If you say to me, what you're doing tonight, and I say, oh, I'm going to the pub, or would you like to come around to my place tonight? And I say, I'm going to the pub, I'm probably turning you down. You say, what are you going to do tonight? And what are you doing tonight? And I say, oh, I'm just going to go to the pub. I'm probably leaving the door open for you to suggest something better. The point is, it's not a grammatical choice. It's a choice of meaning. And that meaning, form, pronunciation, they're tied in together. Where there is meaning, where you have these kind of text-based gap fill type exercises, it's not the learner's meaning. The meaning doesn't belong to the learner in any sense at all. At best, at your absolute, and that's why I refer to it as fingers crossed, at best it's something that learners will find interesting because it's interesting, because lots of people find it interesting. They'll find it interesting, won't they? They'll find it interesting. And very often exercises in published course material are actually, if you look at them and think about them, they're a kind of test. What they're doing is placing a hurdle in front of the learner, which they have to surmount. They're presenting the learner with a problem, beg your pardon, which they need to solve. And I'm not sure that's where we need learners to have a problem. Let me give you an example. This is a gerund or infinitive exercise, which I invented, but it could be any number, and I'm sure you've seen things very similar. I once tried blank skydive, but I'll never do it again. I must remember blank log off before I go home. And we've had our input, we've had our presentation, we've had our thing where we tell learners which verbs take a gerund and which verbs take an infinitive and which ones take both, and when they do, what the different meanings are. And so now your job is to choose which is right. But I'd like you to think about what we want for our learners. I once tried blank skydive, but I'll never do it again. Where do we want our learners to pause? Where do we want our learners to stop and think? Is it, I once tried, now, do I need a gerund or an infinitive? Oh, bugger. It's tried, skydiving, skydiving. I think it's skydiving because it's not, yeah, I think, but I'll never do it again. Or would we rather they stopped at, I once tried to, what's the English word? I tried to, you know, whoosh, from out of the plane. I don't want my learners to stop and think every time they meet a grammatical form. I want them to stop and think, if they have to stop and think, when they're trying to find the best way to say what they're trying to say. And I first thought of this with an activity that I did like this. It was an exercise, and I was doing it with some non-British English-speaking English teachers, some non-native English teachers, and I gave them this activity as an exercise, or something very similar. It wasn't this one. I once tried blanking, but I'll never do it again. I must remember to before I go home. I once pretended to impress a boy or a girl. And one of the teachers said to me, but you've given them the answers. You've told them the answers. They know whether it's an ing or an infinitive because you've told them. Yeah, I have. Because I see that as my job. My job as a language teacher is to make you as the learner better at speaking English. I would like to make producing correct English easier for you if I possibly can. So that's what I try to do when I'm designing activities. And your job, and people like Adrian Underhill and Jim Scrivener talk, I think, quite reasonably about demand high and about the importance of cognitive engagement. But the idea that you are cognitively engaged, that your learners are cognitively engaged in selecting the correct form rather than producing the correct meaning is, I think, problematic. And I would like my learners to be able, yes, I think we need exercises so that learners can produce correct language under controlled circumstances. But that correct language needs to encode useful and interesting meanings. And if it doesn't, what's the sodding point of it? Present perfect. It doesn't mean that you don't manipulate form. I've always wanted, I've been ing a lot lately. I've X times since I came to the UK. I've lived in since I've never, and I never want to. But let's get some meaning into that. Let's get learners focusing their minds on producing interesting, useful things to say, rather than producing correct sentences that will get a tick from their teacher, despite the fact that they are gibberish. Present progressive. I'm living in while I'm in London. It's really in, oh, this is a personal one. In my country, in my country. We don't say in my country, we say in the name of the home country. But anyway, in the name of the home country, I'm usually ing at this time of day. I'm feeling fairly at the moment because my boyfriend, girlfriend, husband, wife is always ing. I wish he, she wouldn't. I'm ing a lot while I'm in England. I'm not asking you, yeah, you're having to produce the correct form. But your focus, I hope, is on producing the correct meaning. My job as a teacher is to support you in producing the correct form. In a nutshell, and I think I'm just about on time, amazingly enough, it's the job of tests to challenge learners. That's what they are for. They are there to see if learners can do all the clever things they're being asked to do. It's the teacher's job. It is my job as a teacher. And it is the entire purpose of a classroom to make getting it right easy. If my job in the classroom is to make getting it right more difficult, something is very, very wrong. Or at least you're paying me for a ludicrous thing. To develop ability, learners need to make and share meanings. That is at the heart of communicative language teaching. It's the heart of everything I believe about language teaching, that making and sharing meanings is how people learn language. Yes, they need to manipulate form, but that is a means to an end. It's not an end in itself. And so my final argument is that classroom exercises learners need to be cognitively engaged. And I totally agree and believe in that. They need to have their minds operating. They need to be thinking. They need to be trying to get it right. They need to be working. But if we are focusing that cognitive effort on deciding whether a verb needs an S on the end of it, we're focusing it in entirely the wrong place. It needs to be focused on how they are getting their meaning across. And our consideration, and this is, I guess, Future Forms is a perfect example of this, needs to be on how can you get your meaning across better. And we as teachers and the classroom environment, as opposed to the examination environment, needs to be focused on supporting learners and making it easier for them to make the correct form while they are producing useful and interesting meanings. And that's